Oh, I was just looking at my notes. I listened to your interview with Emilio. Uh, what a gift he is. Like the world without him getting sober, you
Yeah.
as a fan touching on that, I just imagine a world without him getting sober and the hole, right? Like the black hole that would leave in the music sphere.
Yeah.
Uh, and as someone who has seen Tower of Power and as someone who has sang Digging on James Brown in my jazz band in college, um, just imagining like all of that just disappearing, out of my own life. And then I just thought like, what an open book he was, and talking about his abandonment issues with his parents and with his girlfriend and getting to the heart of that was, and you guys touched on something that I took notes on it about. I wrote a note for myself to make sure that I remember to talk about the cultural reinforcement of stoicism.
Yes.
And that's
That
like
is like a very male culture kind of a thing, right? Like,
very much, very much.
speaking about emotions. And then the other thing that he brought up that other people have also brought up is, in fact, Jam brought this up, was just, almost the insistence of both of them saying, I want to do it my way. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to do it, and then just, losing so many years, but going through a process to finally get to letting go. And, Emilio talked about letting go, and it became a spiritual journey for him.
Yeah.
And Jam also, he talked about letting go. And the thing is that there's so many experts. It's like, why not ask for the answers instead of trying to figure it out, especially when it can be so complicated and so difficult when you're in the midst of an addiction.
Yeah. Totally. I love his story because I got sober in 12 steps as well. And one of my friends, Tommy Rosen, one of the things he says is, I wouldn't want to imagine a world without the 12 steps because it's like a roadmap and millions of misfits have followed the roadmap successfully. I mean, misfits, if you just want to, like, I like to bag on me, right? So I'll just start with me, but like, where people are when they find the 12 steps is not exactly at the top of their game.
No, yeah, it's like at the bottom of the barrel, because I think when you first hear about the 12 steps, like, people would not make fun of it, but if you're looking at it from the outside in, it's like this story that we've heard for so many decades, the 12 steps. It almost sounds corny,
Yes.
but it's been around for so long because it works.
For a reason.
Yeah.
And there's that moment where you finally, like he said, he used the phrase, was brought to his knees. I was brought to my knees. I know what that's like. It's humbling. And then you're finally willing. And you're like, oh, I'm actually going to go to a meeting. Oh God, how did it come to this? And I remember my friend Tommy saying the exact same thing. Like, how did it come to this? And like, not how did my life get to this point? No, how did I get to a point where I'm considering a meeting? Like, and I remember Pat Carnes, who's an expert on sex addiction. That's what I got sober from. He said, the average guy, from the moment he's aware that he should go to a 12-step meeting, is like 2 years between the awareness and the action.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
lot of Russian roulette.
Right. And, we all know people that never make it there.
I'm saying
They don't have somebody. I mean, sometimes there's, a friend or a spouse or somebody that says that it either encourages them or says you have to or whatever it is. But,
yeah.
There are people that lose their way and they don't make it.
Nope.
And one thing I read in your book, Sonic Recovery, was that you did come to a point where you were at the edge of a bridge. And you called somebody, thankfully, and that person helped you off.
Literally walked me off the bridge.
Yeah. Now, what mindset were you at the time? I mean, what were you you know?
I could tell you exactly. I mean, I can
Yeah.
see it.
Because
I
I
mean,
really do want to start with your addiction because that's
oh,
really the
cool.
foundation of everything, right?
Yeah, and I'm an open book on it. So I could tell you exactly where I was. It was in Jacksonville, Florida. I know exactly where I was walking, what side of the bridge, everything that had just happened. I had just screwed up with a female colleague of mine, and in my head, as I was walking back to my hotel, which was on the other side of the river, in my head, the way that it was going to go was she was going to disclose and tell everybody. I had just been like not awarded, but recognized for my TED talk
Okay.
at that same conference that morning. So I'm at the like pinnacle of my career that morning, which
Yeah.
seems to be when I tend to act out, is when things are actually going really well for me.
Oh.
It's almost like a self-sabotage thing. And I screw up. I'm going back to my hotel, and in my head, I only see one future, and the future is I'm going to get kicked out of my field
Mhm.
because I'm a man in a female-dominated field. This is before Me Too, but it was like prescient, and there is just this. I just ruined my career, and this is going to ruin my marriage. And as my brain is in this feedback loop of terror and stress and emotional pain from all this anxiety of this imagined future, because you know how that is, we're all mind readers, we can, and we're all future like fortune tellers, we know how it's going to go. I
Mhm.
only saw one outcome, which was it was all going to blow up. And as I'm walking over the bridge, I look down at the water, Mari, and the water just says, I can make it all go away. I can make it all go away right now. If you want this pain to end, I could just, all you have to do is come to me. And it felt like the force of gravity was like pulling me
Yeah.
into the river from the bridge. And I got scared because I was like, I thought about it and I entertained it. And I was like, that would be really easy. And this could all end. And the stressed brain is not a rational brain. The amygdala is at work. It's not considering future consequences. All it wants to do is self-soothe in the
Yeah.
moment. And so I saw that as an easy way. That was the fastest way to self-soothe.
Yeah.
And luckily I grabbed my phone, and I have this thing about, I call it my 5 faves, which is, you have that, like those, your favorites on your phone.
Right.
And I just looked at the list, and it was like, mom, can't call mom, wife, can't call wife, sponsor, voicemail, and then my recovery buddy, Joe. And he picked up, and he said, whatever you're doing, he goes, where are you? What are you doing? I told him. He's like, well, just keep walking. Don't break stride. And he started to put in my ear alternate futures that he saw. He's like, okay, well, at least you didn't do this. He's like, what did you do and what didn't you do? And I was like, all right, well, we didn't have sex. I didn't do this. Okay, that's really important. Those are actually really important things. You're in a lot better shape than you could be. This could go lots of different ways, actually. And what I see is this is going to actually all blow over. And why don't you just talk to her directly? And suddenly he put in my head a different imagined future than the one I was stuck in a feedback loop on.
Mhm.
And he's the one who just kind of calmed my nerves. But really what it was that connection between me and him in that moment of like pain. The connection is what kept me going. And I think that's one of the most important things in a recovery journey is it's all about reconnection. And so like the story in the intro about the boy who almost committed suicide,
Right.
like I tell people that story and they're always like, I was like, what is it that's in the heart of a teen? What saves a teen's life when they're and people are like, wow, it's the music. And I'm like, no, it's the connection. The music is the bridge that connects us outside of ourselves to someone or something else we trust. And in that moment, when we stop getting all stuck in our head, I, self, me, as Emilio said, and we think about another person, that connection occurs. And connection is that's how we do life. And that was like, it's like medicine. Connection is like social, spiritual medicine.
It is, and it's amazing how many musicians start writing music, playing music, when they're in the depths of depression or anxiety or going through a really challenging, hard time, they turn to music to soothe themselves
Yep.
and also to distract their mind. I mean, all the wonderful healing things that music brings. And once, you pour that emotion into your music, it just does connect to all the fans, the audience. And when people can feel like, oh, wow, somebody understands what I'm going through right now, it's that feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm not alone anymore.
The number
Right?
one existential question we all have is, am I alone? And it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And when it's answered, and with the answer no, it's one of the most deeply soothing, satisfying, and comforting experiences we have as mammals, because we're social animals. So we, by design, do life in groups, in connection. That's all that's the whole plan. We're not like bears who go off and do their own thing once we're 18. Not humans. No, humans live in groups. Humans depend on each other the whole way. So that is what it's all about. So it's been, one of the things I'll definitely want to touch on in our conversation that Gabor Mate said once. He said, someone asked him about the relationship to artists and addicts.
Hmm.
And he said, why do you suppose, the question to him was, why do you suppose that addiction seems to select for creatives and creativity? Like, why is it that there seems to be this high connection between creative people and addiction? And he goes, it doesn't so much select for creativity, it selects for sensitivity.
Hmm.
Because when your senses, like when you have finer knobs, like you're more fine tuned,
Right.
you feel at a higher definition.
Yeah. And what's funny is that there's the whole idea of emotional sensitivity. It, when people say that, sometimes has a negative connotation.
Very
Like
much.
you're weak.
Yeah.
But actually, I feel like it's almost like being emotionally expressive. Like your emotions are bigger. So as a creative, you think of all the creative industries, whether it's music or art or, um, I mean, there's so many different artistic kind of creative fields.
Yep.
It's all based on emotion.
Yep.
It's because they have this big emotion and they put it in a painting or they write it in a song, and that goes out to the world. But it's based on emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of my neighbor has a Tesla, and it's a performance car. So it's more sensitive than my other neighbor who has a Chevy truck.
Hmm.
That's just a big, tough, dumb workhorse. And people need, Chevy trucks, but other people need, they want to drive a Tesla. But the point is that we don't think of a Tesla as weaker. We actually, performance cars are more sensitive to the road. And we think of that as an attribute in cars. And I always, like my son, he's incredibly sensitive. And I just hammer it over and over. Son, sensitivity is your superpower. Sensitivity is your superpower. You can sense things others can't. You have a wider field of view in terms of emotion than others. You're it's a broader visual spectrum or sound spectrum. Like you can see and feel, you can feel more. And that's a blessing. And growing up in our culture, it can be a curse. And here's how. On the playground as a boy, when you show that sensitivity, it gets interpreted as weakness and it gets preyed on, frankly. And that's the culture we live in, sadly. But if you took all of the sensitive artists, creators, architects, visionaries out of our culture, we wouldn't have culture. So
Yeah.
they're required for culture. And yet at the same time, it's really challenging for them to navigate their way to a point where they can find their place in culture and be celebrated for that very thing.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing is just kind of changing that idea of what a strong man is.
Yes.
And to me, a strong man is being emotionally expressive,
Hmm.
being able to communicate that. And to me, I mean, that is the color of someone's personality, right? That's like, I mean, I think we tend to love creative people because they have all the color of the rainbow as far as emotions, right?
Totally,
And they're
totally.
out to party, they're like having fun, they're dancing, you know, if something touches them, they cry. And, I love that.
Yep.
But still, it's having to change that idea and making it that if you express your emotions, if you're able to communicate that in a healthy way, that is a strong trait opposed to a weak trait.
Yeah, we're still evolving,
Yeah.
still evolving. It's like a generational thing, I think, because I was at an event not too long ago, and was like a roundtable discussion, and it was intergenerational. And the question was, how would you define uh, being vulnerable?
Hmm.
And then you had to write it on a card, and then we put them in a box, and no one signed what they wrote. And then we took everything out, we passed them out randomly, and we read them out loud. And they were like polarized. Like half of them were negatives, half of them were positives. What was really interesting was the table was half one generation, half the other generation. The younger generation, people see vulnerability like 40 and under, ish gray zone. It's like they saw vulnerability as a healthy, thing, an ability to connect with others. People
Right.
that were in their 50s or 60s or 70s saw it as a weakness and as you're at danger, at risk of being preyed upon. And it was just like, oh, that's really interesting. Like this old, this evolution of
Yeah.
what you're talking about there. So it's kind of a fascinating journey. And I imagine that my son, by the time he's my age, there's going to be, and I think it's, so I completely see sensitivity as evolution. Like
Hmm.
we joke about like political correctness, like everyone's more sensitive than they used to be. Good. Because that
Yeah.
means that people are actually, their senses are expanding, and they're realizing that what they used to think was funny isn't funny, because that was insensitive, right? And so their sensitivity is expanding. And I think we're just becoming more like performance cars. We're becoming a culture of Teslas, and we came from being a culture of pickup trucks. And
Yeah.
Jerry Seinfeld and was in Comedians with Cars Getting Coffee. It was him and Stephen Colbert
Okay.
having coffee together, and they were joking how each generation is less tough than the one before. So he's like, so he goes, for example, like, who's tougher, you or your dad? He's like, oh, to Stephen Colbert. I was like, oh, my dad, of course.
Hmm.
And he's like, who's tougher, you or your son? He's like, oh, me, of course. And he's like, who's tougher, you, your dad, or your grandpa? He's like, oh, my grandpa, forget about it. And
Yeah.
so this like idea of like tough, and then sensitive, like that whole thing is just kind of on this evolutionary path. And we'll
Well,
see where it heads.
I guess the good news is that if the younger generation sees vulnerability as a strength, because that is actually being the ability to be very honest and open about everything. Uh, it means that, yeah, we're going in the right direction.
Yep.
And
Yep.
just being able to embrace that and to say, hey, I've got these emotions and let me express them.
Yep.
Now, how exciting is that?
Yeah. That's hopeful.
Well, okay, so music therapy.
Hmm.
Let's just break that down to the basics.
Okay.
How would you describe music therapy?
It is, I usually use an analogy to physical therapy because people are very familiar with physical therapy. So it's just the targeted use of music in a clinical setting
Hmm.
to achieve a goal that actually doesn't have anything to do with music at all. So, for example, in physical therapy, we take exercise and we point it at a problem to fix the problem. You don't need a physical therapist to exercise. Every once in a while, if you've got a diagnosis or an injury, working with a physical therapist and undergoing physical therapy is like just what you need. So, as a guitarist who's been playing guitar for over 30 years, my shoulder froze. from 30 years of playing guitar. I had to go to a physical therapist to do very specific stretching and exercises to fix my shoulder.
Mhm.
Cool. You don't need a music therapist to enjoy music, and it's inherently therapeutic, but there are times when the specific use of it with specific situations will improve the outcome of what the person's going through. And so we can point music at diagnoses, at challenges in very different ways, depending on the diagnosis. And that's one of the things people always ask is like, well, okay, so how does that look? Right? What does that look like? And it's
Yeah.
like, well, it depends very much on who we're treating and what we're treating. And so that's kind of like the short answer. So it's the targeted use of music to affect change in another individual. And the change really isn't about becoming a better musician or learning how to, it's not educational, right? It's not about performance. It's really about they want to get better in some area of their life, and the music's going to facilitate that.
So, what are some of the exercises or homework that you would do that you maybe give your clients as a music therapist? Is that how it works, or is it kind of happen within, you know, your interaction with them?
Yeah. So music therapy, you have three players involved in music therapy. You've got a client
Hmm.
or a group of clients. You've got a music therapist, and then the music therapist is using the whole of music and its elements as like a toolkit. And so we're pulling out the different elements of music and using them in a session, therapy session,
Hmm.
with the clients to achieve very specific goals. So let's talk about it in the context of mental health.
Okay.
So I work with teens and adults who are struggling with anxiety, depression, self-harm, addiction. And for me, addiction is just an umbrella. It's within mental health. It's not a co-occurring thing. It's not a separate thing. You don't have addiction without some sort of mental health issue, because addiction isn't a problem. It's a solution to a problem. It's just a poor solution because the part of the brain that triggers it's not too bright. So when I'm working with patients, and let's say there's kind of 5 things we want patients to be able to do to help them with their mental health. And if you spell them out, they spell the word sober. So it's a nice little easy mnemonic phrase. So we want patients to be able to stay present.
Hmm.
Why? Because if you're tripping out over the future or you're ruminating over the past, you have no control over the future or past, and the brain finds that stressful. So we don't like to be in places where we don't have any control. So we want our thoughts and our attention in the present moment, because that's where we can move our body. So when you make music, music takes place in the present moment. It's time based. So we're going to engage in live music making. And it might look like improvisation with rhythmic instruments. So oftentimes I'll bring West African and Central and South American drums and percussion into a room, and I'll bring a bass drum and I'll introduce the instruments. They're super easy to play. And then I'll lay down a steady heartbeat and I'll say, just connect the instrument to the beat. It's your only job. Explore the sounds, connect to the beat. Explore and connect. Explore and connect. And as they explore the sounds and the instruments, and then they connect the sounds to the beat, what they find is some instruments they connect with more than others.
Hmm.
So they're trying to connect the instrument to the beat, and they try, let's say 3, and I tell them, you got to try at least 3 different instruments. So they'll try this one, they'll try this one, they'll try this one, and they'll connect the instrument to the beat, but they don't necessarily feel connected to that instrument. But usually there's one that they feel the most connected out of the 3. And so they're now connected to the instrument's connected to the beat. Well, who's playing the beat? Me. So now they're connected to me by virtue of the instruments. It's like by proxy. It's not direct, it's indirect.
Hmm.
So it's not confrontational. Who else are they now connected to? They're connected to everybody in the room, because everybody else is also busy trying to connect with the beat. And what they have their eye on is just trying to connect their instrument to the beat. But what's really happening therapeutically is, without words, I'm creating a space of psychological safety, connection, and presence, where
Hmm.
we're all in the present moment connecting together to something outside of ourselves. Now, when that happens, They don't recognize that, wow, like A, I'm present. B, I'm connected. C, I'm moving energy through my body, and I'm moving energy out of my body. And emotions are just energy in motion. So they're just moving emotion out of their body. Didn't even notice that. They're not thinking about the problems in the future or the past. So they're escaping the things that are stressing them out. All of these things are happening in real time. And the piece de resistance is when we engage in music making as human beings, our brains love it, and our brains release oxytocin, which is the feeling of being connected, and it releases dopamine, which is the pleasure chemical when we eat chocolate or have sex.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this wonderful pleasure response in the brain and this feeling of being present and connected. And yet all we're just focusing on is a simple instruction, which is take these claves and connect them to the drum. And then when we wrap it up, we'll say, all right, what instrument did you connect with the most? And everybody has one.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just look at the tools of recovery and we say, listen, that's a metaphor for recovery. There are all kinds of tools in recovery, but you're not going to connect with all of them equally.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them you're going to really find this like resonance with, like even in exercise. Some people like to run, some people like to lift, some people like to swim. You don't connect with every type of exercise, but the important thing is to find the one you connect with and then rinse and repeat. Same with yoga.
I think that's really important to point out that, of course, connection is really important, but the fact that it's not just people that we connect with, but we can connect to different energies, whether that is a musical instrument or a sport or, even when you have an addiction, there are certain drugs or certain things that you
Totally.
gravitate to.
Yeah.
And, one thing with when you have a mood disorder, you can feel disconnected. I mean, that can be part of the condition. So just any kind of connection is almost like a bridge to healing. It's almost like, the light at the end of the tunnel. So, whether it's, like you said, music therapy or an online support group or, face-to-face interaction with a therapist, that's really important.
Totally. And, there's like, I like to hang out with people who are in the many paths philosophy club of recovery, because there's a reason why the 12 steps exist and smart recovery exists and celebrate recovery exists, which is like the polar opposite of smart recovery, and refuge recovery exists. Like there's a place for all of them because we are not all wired identically. We are wired similarly, but not identically. So some people are not going to resonate and not connect with this very neurological approach to recovery, like smart recovery. Some people do not want a Bible-based approach to their recovery, so they're not going to go to celebrate recovery. Some people do not want a program that the word God and higher power comes up over and over and over again. They want to stay away from that. And so refuge recovery is going to be a totally new place of safety for them, depending on everybody's wounds and what they've been through. And so I think that, what you connect with isn't as important as the fact that you're connecting.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the thing. And that's why, like with music, one of the things people ask me all the time is about genres. There's like healthy music, unhealthy music. Are there good music types of music to listen to, bad types of music to listen to? People want to point the finger at heavy metal and they want to point the finger at hip hop. And I'm quick to point out to people, listen, genre is like flavor. It's a personal preference. And it's usually selected for by culture and environment. So what you hear growing up, you start to build this, because music's a language. So even within music, the styles of music are individual languages of music. So classical music is a language of music. It has rules, syntax. It's very like it follows a form. Jazz follows a form. Rock follows a form. Hip hop follows a form. And the one you're around a lot as a kid, you start to build that framework, that language in your own brain. Mm-hmm. So Westerners can't listen to Chinese opera. It's like nails on a chalkboard. But someone in China listens to that and it's glorious to them because it's culturally formed. So it's really important to not pick sides, that there's like one type of music out there. But what I can say is that there is definitely music is often the soundtrack of people's downward spiral. So I like to call it their party playlist.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, chances are those people who are in addiction were listening to a genre of music more than others, more frequently while they were using than something else. It's a pretty safe statement. Now, addicts, they love to be the exception to the rule. Not me, I listen to everything. No, 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 no. The bell curve is you got rockers, you got hip hoppers, you got country, you got classical, you got jazz. People have a preferred genre. And within that genre, there was a catalog of music you were listening to more than everything else in that genre during your heaviest use. So I just call it the party playlist. That party playlist now has a neuro association in your brain
Mm-hmm.
to emotions and behavior. So music, emotion, behavior are all neuro linked in the brain. And so if you play me certain music when I'm early in recovery, it's going to trigger cravings
Mm-hmm.
because of that neuroassociation. And they found that out accidentally doing research on the brain in addiction. And they had guys in an fMRI study and their brains were like all wired up and they were playing classic rock in the machine for the patients.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Clapton's Cocaine. Of all the things to play, guys in addiction, they didn't put two and two together. And this is Mark Gold, who's an addiction pioneer, telling this story. And he's like, every time he would get to the chorus, she don't like, she don't like, she don't like, bling, craving.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as it would say cocaine, the guys who used had that song and the use of cocaine linked. And so it would trigger. So where I'm going with all this is that it's just really important for people to understand that your music, when used correctly, can turn off a craving, but when used incorrectly, can actually trigger one.
Okay. So that is really interesting because it almost sounds like, when um, someone's in an addiction, let's say it's to cocaine, and they have certain friends that they party with, and
Yeah,
they're doing drugs together.
sure.
That part of recovery is to make new friends that are not those friends that have a healthier way of living,
Yep.
because people can be a trigger.
Yep.
But now that you're saying music can be a trigger, it makes perfect sense because music is also tied to so many other memories in our
Yes.
past, right?
Yeah, totally.
We could think of our first kiss, with a certain song, or the song we danced to at the prom. Any kind of scenario can bring back memories. So,
Oh yeah. It's like a file cabinet in your brain of memories, and songs are like the little tab
mm-hmm.
on the little file. And when you play the song, it opens everything that's in that file. And that's the way that it occurs inside of the brain. And it's fascinating because I've worked with patients with Alzheimer's and dementia throughout my whole career. And I've had clients who can't remember where they are, what day it is, what they had for breakfast. But if I play, and they're in their mid 80s, and if I play the Quezon song, I remember this as an early music therapist, I played the Quezon song, which is kind of like the Army's anthem, right?
Yeah.
For gentlemen in the Army. This gentleman began to tell me in extreme detail how in World War II, he was stationed in Italy. His dad was stationed in Africa. And this one particular weekend, the armed services took them and flew them both to Cyprus for a weekend R&R so they could be together. And he laid out all the details because I opened the file with the song and then all the memories popped out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what else pops out is not just the information, it's the emotions. And that is really the trick, because when we're usually using to self-soothe from pain. And pain comes in 4 flavors: physical, emotional, social, and spiritual. And in the brain, it all gets processed the same way. It's the same circuitry. So if you have emotional pain attached to a song, you're going to experience the emotional pain again if you haven't heard that song since you were in emotional pain the last time you heard that song. That they're going to be linked together. And that's why memories are double-edged swords, and we sometimes don't trust our memories because we experience those emotions, but we experience them now. in the present. And so what'll happen is we don't want to experience those emotions. That's painful. The brain triggers a craving in an attempt to self-soothe.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to be careful. So I always tell all the guys and gals in recovery, listen, take a break from your party playlist. It's going to take a while for that link to kind of atrophy. And, down the road, a few years from now, you're probably going to be able to go back and listen to those songs, and you're not going to have the same sting. And but the important thing is to understand that that link exists, so that as you check in with the music, notice what the music's making you feel. Are you starting to feel a little squirrely? Are you starting to feel a little anxious? Are you starting to feel a little sad or brokenhearted or any kind of emotional distress? And if so, you're not ready. You need to give that a break. And luckily, there's a universe of music to be listening to in the meantime. So it's not like you got to go cold turkey. It's just that your party playlist is going to set you up for cravings and potentially relapse if you're not aware of that. And so that's an important piece. And when I was early on in my field, I didn't want to believe music could do any harm. I was like, yeah, music's great. And then when I learned about this research, I was like, oh, music in the right hands done the right way is great. Music in the wrong hands done, not even like maliciously, but just, and not the word ignorant. It's kind of like when you do something you didn't mean to, inadvertently. That's the word.
Yeah, just like not knowing. And
you just didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't consciously be thinking that what you just told me, but now that you say it, it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
Because, I could think of a song that, brings me back to a really bad memory, and there you go, there's the trigger.
Yep.
But one thing you mentioned also, I mean, I used to be in the pharmaceutical industry.
Okay.
And so I learned all about the chemicals in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about dopamine, and in your book, you also talked about cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's other chemicals like serotonin and norepinephrine, but how music can activate and, affect all of those chemicals in your brain that are responsible for our emotions,
yes.
at times. So
yes.
there is a science behind music therapy. And it sounds like you don't necessarily have to be a musician to have a music therapist. But I would also think that being a musician, that possibly playing or writing could be part of the therapy.
Absolutely. So the goals are, we talked about staying present. So when you play music, if you're like improvising music, you're present because it's happening. You're making it up right in the moment. If you're practicing a piece of music you've played a bunch of times, you can check out. You can actually, your brain can wander. So it's, for musicians, improvisation is really important to really staying present while they're playing, because otherwise they can pop out of the present moment. But one of the things as musicians that playing allows us to do is move a lot of emotion out of ourselves without having to use words. And this is really important for guys particularly, because words to express emotions, one, we live in a culture where we're reinforced not to. And this idea of being, macho and stoic and strong really doesn't serve somebody in addiction. This is not the time for that. We want to be able to open up and express, which just means to squeeze out. We want to squeeze out this energy, get it out of our body. But language becomes a toll booth because you got to have the right words. Otherwise you're like, ah. And then you got to have the right listener, which can be challenging because you don't want to go find a therapist. I don't know any guy who has any interest in pursuing a therapist. I'm a music therapist. I have no interest in what it would take to go find a therapist. Forget it. That's heavy lifting. I don't want to do it. Just the logistics of it, I don't want to do, much less, oh God, is this person, are we going to connect? Never mind.
It takes time.
Takes time
to find the right person. And that also can be challenging. That's why, part of the podcast, one of the key things is be persistent in finding the help that you need, because there's times where you try things and it's like, what is this? This is not for me.
Yeah,
and
totally.
You've got to pick through and try so many different things until you find what connects with you, whether it's a therapist or a medication or,
even a home group in 12-step.
Whatever.
Every meeting's different. You'll have guys finally go to a meeting and they didn't like the personalities in the room, or they didn't like the style of the meeting. And I'm like, go to 6 different meetings before you make up your mind, because every meeting is its own subculture. You'll connect with one more than you'll connect with another. And you might just find what you need a lot faster by finding 6 meetings than finding 6 therapists. No offense to my therapist colleagues out there. You're just hard to find. It's hard. And we don't want to talk. So we need ways to get it out without talking. And then, our spouse loves us and is invested in us. So we talk to them, they take it personally. And we're like, no, this isn't about you. This is me trying to get out what's going on in me. But they love me. And so they don't want me to be holding the pain. So they take it personally. They take it from me. They make it about them, trying to take it off my shoulders. That's the irony of taking it personally. It's all out of love. And then you're like, well, I can't go to you because you get upset. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want you to be sad every time I talk. So I can't go. I can't talk to you. I can't find a therapist. You know what? Forget it. But I can take out my emotions on my piano, on my drums, on my guitar, through singing, without having to use any words at all. And so I can open up and just get all of this out as a musician without going down what looks like a very narrow, hard, windy road. And then just the act of being creative, super healthy for the brain. Oh, it's so healthy, because recovery is an act of creativity. Like, you're creating a new way to deal with your emotions other than drinking and drugging and sexing and whatever you do. So that in and of itself requires you to be not stressed, because you can't be creative in a stress response. So the only time you can be creative is when your nervous system's relaxed. So when you're playing music, you're in that relaxed state. And so it's building this idea of creativity as a metaphor, not just for art. And then last but not least, I can play my guitar and it can be out of tune, and my guitar is not going to stop me from playing just because I didn't tune it. I can play out of time on my drum set, and my drums aren't going to stop me from playing just because I'm playing out of time. Like, I can sing in my garage or anywhere else, and I can sing out of tune in my car, and nothing's going to stop me from continuing to sing just because I'm not perfect. And I think this is really important, is that music allows us to connect with something outside of ourselves, and it accepts us exactly where we are, exactly how we feel. And it doesn't stop us if we can't hit the note or keep the beat or like hit the, remember the tune. It's just there waiting for us. My guitars are literally standing by, just waiting for me. And I love that. And, having to undo some of the performance anxiety and perfectionistic kind of programming as musicians go through, just let it rip. Just let it rip. Like, no wrong notes, just like no wrong notes, no wrong beats. And if you can get yourself to that place when you play your instrument, then you're really just playing and you're not working. And then that's just really healthy, really healing. And I think for the musician, it's important for the musician to pay attention to how they feel afterwards. If they feel worse, there was either the style or the approach wasn't working, wasn't the right fit. And that's why working with a music therapist can help, because the music therapist has their eye on, is this person's emotions, how are they moving up, or are they actually moving down? Because, hey, we've all listened to music and felt worse after. We've all used music to reinforce a negative state. We've all had a good cry and actually, like, it's gotten worse afterwards. And you can do that with music. If you're in a sad mood and you just sit strumming or arpeggiating on E minor on your guitar for 10 minutes, you're going to reinforce that sad state even more so. So, you just want to be aware of, like, where do you feel after the music making? Do you feel better or do you feel worse? If you feel worse, look at what you were doing and maybe try something different, a different style, a different song, a different instrument, a different key, a different mode, a different scale, and change it up, because you have that vocabulary as a musician.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing, is just to keep trying, keep trying. And one thing about songwriting and creating music, not only is music non-judgmental, but there is something really amazing if you do get with the right person to play with.
Yes.
Whether you play music with them or you sing with them. I mean, I've played piano and I've taken vocal lessons, and I have gotten a joy that is indescribable, such a high when you connect with somebody musically,
Yes.
you know? It's
Yes. Oh yeah.
and that is really exciting, and that can kind of like wake up your whole body and mind. The other thing I find is that, you know, and I think this is especially with men, because they aren't able to communicate their emotions. You know, society says not as much, but it's okay to express that in a song. It's
Yeah.
okay to write lyrics as if it were a diary and spill all of that on stage, and people love that, right?
Yep.
Because it's so honest and truthful and vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
really good insight.
yeah, and they're not judged for it.
No,
For some
opposite.
reason, it's okay, right, to do it
Yeah.
in a song.
Yeah, it totally is. It's a socially acceptable way to be vulnerable, to talk about your feelings, and just to lift the performance anxiety from anybody. You don't ever have to perform your music on stage for it to help you. So just the fact of writing music, I had a client who had schizophrenia and addiction issues, and he just never wanted to play live again because he couldn't physically play as well as he used to. But he would write in his garage, and we'd play in his garage, and he felt so much better when we would play together, and we never had to play a live gig ever. It was just the act of playing the music for the sake of playing the music, the process, not the result. We're
Mhm.
very results driven in our kind of music culture. And so if the idea of like playing in front of anybody else terrifies you, don't worry, you never have to. You
Mhm.
can write a song and express yourself in those lyrics and in the music. And then if you want to share it, great. And you know, one of the things that's great, I got to tell you this, this is just a shameless plug for working with a music therapist rather than a musician. See, a
Okay.
music therapist doesn't bring their needs or ego into the music making. So, like my case study when I was an intern was a blues guitarist. I grew up playing the blues also on guitar, and my he was a stage 4 cancer patient, and he was using his guitar to express his emotions about being 19 and dying from cancer. It was pretty intense. And the first time we played together, he soloed for 7 minutes straight,
Wow.
did not take a breath on his fingers for 7 minutes. Now, there is no other guitarist out there that's going to wait around for 7 minutes for their turn. And he said to me, he's like, never, I've never had the opportunity to play with another person and stretch out that much and say that much. I said, that's because you've probably never jammed with a music therapist, because my needs as a musician, I leave them at the door. I'm just here. It's just you and music. And that's like, there's no Tim needing a turn in the process. There's no Tim's opinion to the chord progression or the lyrics. It's all you. I'm just here in service of you. And so musicians in recovery have a really unique experience when they work with a music therapist, because they've usually never, it's always so transactional with other musicians because we're all so needy. So we like have our own needs and we have our own opinions. And God bless, ask any spouse of a musician what it's like to listen to a band bicker. It's like a dysfunctional 4 or 5 way marriage, right? So leaving all that behind and being like, cool, man, keep going. Well, what do you
Yeah.
think about this? Cool, man. I think that's great. I love how you're getting into it right there. Really? Yeah. Go do some more. And that has been some of the biggest joys for me as a guitarist, is to watch other guitarists just express themselves guilt free for long stretches because they've got a lot they want to get out. And for a lot of us, I know as a guitarist, I can say more with my fingers sometimes than I can with my mouth. Like my fingers know what notes to play. My guitar knows what I need to say. I know that might sound, well, no, this is for musicians. Like, you guys get this. Like, sometimes your instrument does a way better job of expressing you than your mouth does. And so having a situation where you just have unrestricted access to just let it out and let it rip is like, ah. And it's like, yeah, dude, it's the you show. It's all you. This is all for you. You let it out.
Well, they say that a lot of you know, mood disorders can be caused by people stuffing their emotions down
Yep.
and not either not dealing with those emotions, or just trying to I call them disrespecting the emotions,
There
because
you go.
you're just trying to ignore them.
Yep.
But with music, you're able to let it out and you're able to vent all of that out. And you're right, I've had many musicians say that music is my communication,
Yeah.
that they feel more comfortable communicating that way than sometimes with a one-on-one conversation.
Totally.
And one thing that you mentioned a patient that had schizophrenia, and you mentioned patients that have Alzheimer's and dementia. Are there particular mood disorders that, fit well with music therapy, or, seem to maybe improve more than other conditions?
That's a good question. Nothing comes to mind. What I can say is, I'll answer that from this perspective. What I've noticed in the research, people benefit. They have really good results, clinical results, if they present with anxiety.
Mhm.
Uh, Music therapy is extremely effective for persons with anxiety. It's extremely effective for persons with chronic pain.
Mhm.
It's extremely, which is a multifaceted thing. People with depression, um, those would probably be the big three. And then in other areas, kids with autism, phenomenal results with music therapy. People on the spectrum, music is a phenomenal tool for them. And so those would be kind of like some of the all-star areas. On a neurological side, not from the mood disorder side, but from the just more of a physiological perspective, patients who have had a stroke and are trying to learn how to speak, say, or walk again benefit tremendously from music therapy. The results are phenomenal in research. So we can point music at lots of different patients, but frequently, we're just part of a interdisciplinary approach. Like it's rarely one thing
Mhm.
is what does the trick, right? So we're working with them, and they tap into some repressed emotion through the music that they finally get in touch with, and they put two and two together and they realize, wow, some insight. Like your guest was talking about, he had insights years into his recovery journey, right?
Mhm.
and and that can happen a lot of time because music will move emotion out of the body that the conscious brain doesn't want to go anywhere near because it's painful. And repressed emotions are typically negative emotions. Or painful, meaning pain filled emotions that the brain it just doesn't want to experience them. So it's just playing this game of dodgeball. I don't want to feel pain, don't want to feel pain, don't want to feel pain. I'm going to put this over here, I'm going to put this over there. But it's not like it disappears. It's still in the body. And particularly if you've had trauma, and we all know in addiction research that trauma and addiction go hand in hand, and trauma doesn't get out of the body through words. It's through non-verbal experiential modalities like music, like dance, movement, EMDR, EFT, things that don't require words. So it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a key player in the allied health field. And most of the time when I'm speaking at a conference, clinicians will come up after me and they'll be like, I wish I knew about this 20 years ago. Like I would have been employing music as a tool, in my toolbox with my clients for this whole time, because of all the reasons you said. That it helps them stay present, it helps them open up, it helps them be creative, it helps them escape stress, it helps them reconnect, all in healthy ways, all at the same time.
Mhm.
So it's not just effective, it's efficient.
Well, your book is called Sonic Recovery, Harness the sorry about this. My
That's
thing's
okay.
not working. My notes.
Harness the power of music to
Harness the
stay
power of
sober.
music to stay sober.
Yeah.
Now, with your addiction, which was a sex addiction,
Mhm.
was music therapy something that you utilized for your addiction, or was that something that you found afterwards?
I found recovery from sex addiction before I found music therapy. They were close, but what I found actually was early on in my recovery, I found I had my own experience with music triggering relapse and triggering cravings and triggering euphoric recall, because I didn't understand yet um, that music can bring you back to these places in your past where you want to use again. And for me, using would be, pursuing women, sleeping with women. And it was the pursuit and for me, the way my brain thought about it, the conquest, because I just objectified women. And growing up in the 80s in the United States in heavy music was like women were just objectified left, right, and center. And that was the culture I grew up in. And I literally thought that's what I was supposed to do. Thought I was supposed to do that. At one point, I remember thinking to myself, I met a stripper and she was very attractive. She was 6 feet tall. And I told my bandmates, they were like, well, did you sleep with her? And I was like, well, of course. And they were like, yeah. And they high-fived me like a badge of honor. And I told them, I was like, well, dude, she was 6 feet tall. I felt morally obligated to sleep with her. Like, that was the way my brain thought at the time. We all talk about insanity in our own addictions. And the way I thought about women, I was totally insane. And what I noticed with music was music would put me in a trance for like the hunt. It would put me in a trance for I would be fiending, just like any other addict is fiending. Like, I needed a fix, I needed a woman, and it could trigger me so fast. And for me, it was electronic dance music, EDM, which we back in the day called techno, right?
Yeah. Yes, that beat.
That beat. It's all it took.
Keeps going, right?
It was like I could feel in my veins 4 beats of techno, and suddenly I feel this pulse. And so I kind of learned the hard way, like how powerful music is, because it really messed me up early on in my recovery several times before I ever understood this neurological connection and these neuroassociations and the nervous system. And that's why I think that music therapy is so important, because we all know music's good for our mood and our spirit, but to understand what a key player it is on our nervous system and how our nervous system is the key to relapse is like, oh, okay, if I get stressed, that triggers a craving. If I reach for the right type of music, I can turn off that craving. Wow, that's a totally different way to think. But not knowing that, I'd reach for the wrong music and trigger a craving. And then I just thought it was my character defects. I thought I wasn't committed to my recovery. I would beat myself up. And I was the one triggering me. And it was music, my best friend, that was inadvertently doing it. And I think that's why it's so important for people to understand that music, it's a powerful tool, and it can be used and it can be misused.
I see. So for you, your solution to your sex recovery was not only the 12 steps, but going through therapy. I would think having to learn no therapy.
No, the 12 steps
12
was
steps.
really, so there was like a couple of key things that really did it for me. One of them was walking into a 12-step meeting. That changed my life. It immediately allowed me to shed the shame of my behavior, because I was in a room full of guys where I said the worst things I ever did, and all they did was smile and nod, and they were like, we love you, buddy. That's awesome. Like, thank you for having the courage to say all that. And I was like, they destigmatized my past. And I think that's one of the powerful things about going to 12-step meetings early on in recovery. I think 12 steps vital for somebody early on, because it just humanizes you right away. You're just like, oh, I'm not alone. All kinds of people think the same things I think, do the same things I do. And despite all that, have turned a corner, and they're not holding back on what worked. It's the most generous environment. You walk into that environment, and it's really important for people to understand, like, they do a lot of psychology studying on change, like how do people change habits? There's a science to it, and there's influence is vital. And so their influence happens in your head, it happens between people, and it happens with your surroundings, like your physical environment. Those are the 3 areas. So when you change your environment, that's a third of the game. When you change who you hang with and the people you're hanging with, are all in the same conversation, which is solution focused and forward focused and healing focused and health focused and reconnecting and letting go of shame, like that changes what goes on between your ears. And if you're hanging out with a bunch of people all day long that are reinforcing your behavior and high fiving when you cheat on your girlfriend,
Mm-hmm.
or you get high and they call you a pussy when you turn down a line of Coke or another shot or another beer, that is a massive influence on your behavior. And don't pretend it's not. Humans are pack animals. We influence each other all day, always. So for me, that was a keystone moment in my life. And then working with, there's very like the scientific side of understanding managing my like biochemistry, like don't get hungry, right? Start to crave, right? Don't get tired.
Mm-hmm.
That's the physical side. Angry and lonely, the emotional side, right? But halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. It's really pointing that we're a mind body system. So working with some one-on-one practitioners that aren't traditional therapists to manage my physical health was very transformative in fixing my emotional health. And now, and this is going back, 12, 13 years ago. And now we're starting to understand, gut health and the relationship to gut health to mental health is massive, massive.
Yeah,
So
I find that really interesting.
really new frontiers.
Right.
So, if you want to take care of your head, you want to take care of your gut too. They're two sides of the same coin. And that's why those Snickers commercials are funny. Because when someone hasn't eaten and their blood sugar goes down, they're not themselves. We've all seen it, right?
Well,
And
that's what hangry is,
that's
right?
totally what
Hangry.
hangry is. This is legit stuff. So like
And, yeah.
I had to really get control of how I ate, when I ate, how I slept. And we live in a culture that reinforces bad eating and bad sleeping.
Yeah.
And so those are like key pieces to the puzzle. After I realized I wasn't alone and there was a way out, it was okay, how do I manage my physical body and all this so I physically feel better, which will now support the emotional and spiritual work that I'm doing in the 12 steps.
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's the understanding, right, amongst people that are going through the same thing you're going through. And when you're going through it in the, like, I guess, I don't want to say the regular world, but like with people that are not, you feel alone.
Yep.
So there's that understanding, the camaraderie. You've got people that have solutions that have worked.
Yep.
And that's the hotbed of, people helping each other out, and which saves so much time. And plus, you connect with those people.
Yeah.
And I guess just a safe place, right? To vent.
That's it.
And
You
to
have to
share.
have psychological safety in your life. As a
Mhm.
human being, you have to feel safe to be able to crack open the character armor and spill the contents. And if you've been through any kind of neglect or abuse as a kid, you have trust issues. And, most people have. They've been through that. And the way your brain's designed is to remember those bad things so you don't do them again. It's a survival mechanism. It's not pathological to focus on the negative. You're designed to focus on the negative. That is how your primitive brain is built. So having to kind of overcome that takes work. And, the courage to walk into a room. And for me, in my first meeting, I remember like there was a group share, so everyone was check in, like the guy across the room, we were in a circle and we just started checking in one person at a time. Hi, I'm Bob, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I'm a sex addict. Hey, Bob. Right. And we go around the room and the guys are talking and I am hearing the most specific thoughts, beliefs, feelings, memories, behaviors that I've engaged in that I didn't think anyone else on the planet thought, felt, or had done. And halfway around the circle, I was at 6 o'clock. It got to me, and it's my first meeting. And I was like, hi, I'm Tim, and apparently I'm a sex addict. And they were like, hey, Tim. And I was like, you guys just all told my story. Like, how did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
It was so specific. And I think that's one of the things that's so healing because they're just talking about it. And I think there's a fine line between glorifying something and normalizing and destigmatizing something. And I think it's really important for people who are struggling with the behavior to hear other people who are struggling with behavior be able to talk about it without any shame.
Right.
Because
Right.
when they hear someone talk about it with shame, it's the first time they realize it's possible. And I remember Tommy Rosen talking at a yoga conference about how after he got sober from drugs and alcohol, he used women and he became a sex addict. And he talked about it so matter of factly as a part of his human experience. I said, oh, I can do that. I can't do that yet, but I that means I can do that. That means I can talk about it. I can get to a place in my own journey where there's just no shame anymore. It happened. It's not like I erased the past, but the shame doesn't have to come with me. I can leave that behind, even as I take my journey and my experience with me.
Well, the thing that Emilio Castillo was saying of Tower of Power was that his addiction got so bad that he pretty much had decided that he was just going to die. You know, that he couldn't stop, that he had tried multiple times. He'd been to the hospital. But when he heard that somebody else who had an addiction like him there was an out, that they had figured out a way to live life happily and get rid of the addiction, that he turned the corner. That's when he turned the corner. And like you said, that's the power of, connection and understanding.
Yep.
Especially with addiction and mood disorders.
And I think it takes some humility. And again, another thing that doesn't come easily to men is being humble and like being beat by something. Like, I'm whipped and I need help. The guys don't want to admit they're whipped and they need help. They know, oh, I'm going to get up and do it, persevere, and I'm going to pick myself up by my own bootstraps, and I'm going to overcome this myself. And, in our culture, we have this idea of self-determinism, which just wrecks so many people, because in order to change a habit, you need three things. You need the right behavior. You need to know what it is, but you also need to be held accountable to it by someone else. And you need a community in which that reinforces and encourages and almost calls you into being, like a vacuum, pulls you towards this goal you have by them already being that way. And that's what the 12 steps has. That's what, if you go to like the gyms, these big box gyms where they do CrossFit, that's what they have there. They have the technique, but then they have accountability because it's competitive. And then they have a community where everybody's supporting each other. That's why they all screw up their New Year's resolutions, because they're trying to do it by themselves. And I've tried to kick habits by myself unsuccessfully my whole life. And the only things I've ever been able to change, I changed in community.
Yeah. And I think also the way to look at it is that you can't be an expert at everything. There's so many things. And if you can go to somebody that has gone through it, or who is an expert and has made all the mistakes that you might be making, why not ask them? They'd be so happy to tell you what you could try that works.
Totally.
And that really is a smart way to go, and will save so much time, and could possibly save your life, because sadly a lot of people lose their lives just
absolutely. We were talking
giving up or trying, and
at some point we were talking, and I can't remember if we had begun recording when I said, that the Patrick Carnes, who's a sex addicts expert, had mentioned at a conference that the average amount of time it takes a man to get into a 12-step meeting from the time he considers he should probably go to a 12-step meeting is 2 years. And the concept I thought of was just, that guy is playing Russian roulette for 2 years. And because I have guys in treatment who go out, they're in treatment for 6 months, they go out one night and they OD. That's all it took. I have guys who have been, sober, and then they go out, they blow their sobriety, and within 2 or 3 days, they've been robbed. They've gotten in fights. I remember one got stabbed. Like within 3 days of losing his sobriety, he was on a ventilator, and they took him off life support the following day. I mean, it's like we're so close, because that world is just so risky. There's just so much unexpected danger and unintended consequences and collateral damage that happen in the world of addiction. And, it's not hyperbole that we lose. The stats aren't even believable as to how many people die a day from addiction. If I even bothered to quote them accurately, it wouldn't matter, because I remember when I was doing the research on my book, I was like, I can't cite the number of people ODing from all addictions per day in this book, because no one will believe it. It's
Yeah.
it's it's so far past
Mind-boggling.
mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling. But Tim, thank you so much for our conversation. I can honestly go on and on because it's so
Yeah, totally.
interesting to me. But is there anything else that you'd like to say about your book? I know you're a motivational speaker. You're an author of several books. The most recent one is called Sonic Recovery. And you're at timringgold.com if people want to find out more about music therapy and the kind of work that you do.
Yeah. If it's okay, if I can give them a gift, what I'd say is, one of where the stress is right now is in the present because of the pandemic we're in.
Right.
A lot of the stresses we're experiencing are happening right in the present moment. And what do we like to do when we're stressed in the present? We try to escape. And like, Calgon, take me away. Remember that commercial way back in the day?
You.
Yeah. So that's the whole thing, right? You want to just escape the stress. So one of the things I've done for 12 years now with thousands of patients and clients is I've used a very particular relaxation musical experience that I lead them through to help them safely leave the present moment. And using some very specific tempoed music that I wrote, walk you back to a point in your past where you're happy, healthy, safe, and connected, and experience that again, and then bring those feelings back into the present moment to help overcome what you're dealing with. I call it the relaxation vacation. And so what you do is you're just going to go to my website, which is timringgold.com, and you'll see my bald head, and it'll say reach for music. And then you'll see a big question right across the front. It'll say, how would you like to take a relaxation vacation? You're going to say, I'd love to take a relaxation vacation, Tim, because I can't take any other kind of vacation right now. So you put your name and your email address there, and then you'll get an email from me, and it'll send you a download to this experience. And anytime you're feeling the stress build in the present moment, and you just want to like reach for the phone or reach for the screen or reach for the fridge or something worse, just reach for this relaxation experience and just take a 15-minute vacation. You're just 15 minutes away from being totally relaxed and experiencing one of the best moments you've ever had, rather than the stress of the current moment.
Well, that's exciting. Thank you so much, Tim.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for letting me share it.
Yes. And so go to timringgold.com. And thank you so much again for being on the Check Your Head podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Bye-bye. That was great, Tim. Thank you.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
Tim,
thank you.
I will let you know when it's all together. It might be, I have about 5 other interviews that I have to kind of match up, but I will let you know as soon as the episode drops.
Great. Look forward to promoting it. This is really great. It's just such a great conversation for musicians to have, because again, the percentage of musicians who are struggling with mental health issues is higher than the typical population. So this is a huge service to them.
Yes. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
All right. Have a good night. Okay.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Hi. I'm Mari Fong, producer and host for Check Your Head, Mental Health for Musicians podcast, where musicians and experts come and share their stories and solutions for mental health and wellness. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you like us, please follow us on social media at Check Your Head Podcast. And visit us at checkyourheadpodcast.com, where you'll find over 100 mental health resources that will assist you in your mental health recovery. Also, if you want to show your love, you can donate or buy the merch. We have superhero tees and hoodies for sale to remind you and your loved ones that you are superheroes every day. You rock, and we love you.